You think money buys respect? Tonight, billionaire hotel magnate Michel Romano storms into the grand banquet hall, his luxury watch glinting under the chandelier, and unleashes a savage tirade on a young waitress for daring to make him wait. The room falls silent as his words slice through the chatter, until she turns pen poised and delivers one flawless sentence that stops his power in its tracks. In a moment of pure, unshakable dignity, she shows the world what true strength really looks like. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping showdown, hit subscribe and ring the bell, because you're about to witness how dignity can topple power. Like this video if you believe respect is earned, and drop a comment sharing your own silent victories. Now brace yourself for the moment everything changes. Aaliyah Brooks was 24 years old, fresh out of college, with a hospitality degree she paid for with student loans. She'd taken this job at the Sovereign Grande Hotel's opulent ballroom to cover her bills, and she excelled at it. Every evening she donned the crisp white blouse and black vest uniform, her natural curls pinned back neat and tight. Her posture was impeccable, shoulders squared, chin lifted just enough to meet her gaze in the mirror. In her apron pocket she carried a slim leather notebook and a pen, her tools of the trade. Tonight's event was one of the hotel's most prestigious charity galas. Crystal chandeliers hung low overhead, casting fractured light over tables dressed in ivory linen and gold-trimmed plates. Servers moved like clockwork, gliding past guests in tuxedos and gowns dripping with diamonds. Classical music floated through the air, punctuated by polite laughter and clinking glasses. In the center of the room stood Michel Romano, the founder and CEO of Romano Hospitality Group, an empire worth over $10 billion, his face familiar from every business magazine. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and a silk tie, his silver cufflinks catching the glow of the candles as he leaned forward, scanning the guests like a general on his battlefield. Backstage, Aaliyah checked her station one last time. Water glasses filled, exactly 3/4 napkins folded into perfect triangles, menus stacked in even piles. Her manager, Carlos Vega, a stocky man with a close-cropped beard, paused beside her. "Aaliyah, remember what we talked about," he said, voice low but urgent. "Keep it smooth. Romano doesn't suffer fools." She nodded, feeling the familiar flutter in her chest, excitement tinged with anxiety. She'd heard stories Romano had a temper that could scorch marble, and he rarely tolerated mistakes. She locked eyes with Carlos for a moment. "I've got this," she said, though her pulse thumped beneath her collarbone. He offered a half smile and disappeared into the throng. Aaliyah inhaled deeply, tasting the faint scent of citrus polish and fresh roses carried in on the air. She reminded herself of her grandmother's words, "Stand tall, speak truth, but let your poise be your shield." Moments later, Aaliyah stepped onto the polished oak floor of the ballroom. She moved toward table 22, where two tech investors debated the merits of a new AI startup. She greeted them with a warm tone, jotting down their orders for champagne and still water. Then she headed to table 19, near the grand piano, to deliver hors d'oeuvres. Each step she took was precise heels, clicking softly, pen tapping against the notebook in a reassuring rhythm. As she passed table 14, she caught her first glimpse of Romano's private table number 9, where he sat with a woman in a sapphire evening gown. His assistant, a nervous-looking young man in a slim black suit, hovered at his side. Romano glanced at his watch, his jaw tightening. Aaliyah felt the temperature in the room shift. It wasn't the air conditioning, but a ripple of anticipation that traveled across the floor. Guests paused mid-sip, servers hesitated, and even the pianist's fingers froze on the keys. In that pregnant silence, Aaliyah reminded herself she was here to serve, to perform every task flawlessly. She steadied her breath, her heart settling into a steady beat. Whatever happened next, she would not surrender her composure. She had prepared for this moment many times in her mind, visualizing patience, reclaiming her center, turning pressure into power. This is where Aaliyah's story truly begins, at the crossroads between dignity and degradation, between silence and strength. When a man with the world at his feet decides to try and break her, she'll show him, and everyone watching that true authority doesn't shout. It stands unshakable. As Aaliyah approached table 9 with the wine list in her hand, She felt the familiar tilt in her chest the moment before everything changed. Michelle Romano's silvered eyes caught hers, but not with warmth. Instead, they held barely contained impatience. He stared at his watch as though its ticking were a personal affront, and then, without warning, he barked, "You yes, you in the vest. How long have you been standing there? 20 minutes. Is that your idea of service?" Her pen hovered over the leather notebook. Around them, servers froze mid-stride. A guest's laugh cut off in mid-cocktail sip. Aaliyah's palms pricked with sweat, but her voice remained steady. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just—" "Don't apologize." Romano snapped, leaning back so hard his chair scraped the marble floor. "I'm tired of apologies. I want action. You people, all you do is apologize when you're useless." His words landed like stones in a pond, rippling disdain through the room. Aaliyah felt her throat tighten, her ribcage constrict. She inhaled, tasting the mingled scent of roses, and spilled cognac, and delivered each syllable with care. "I will take your order right away, sir." "Would you prefer the Cabernet or the Sauvignon Blanc?" Romano sneered, the corners of his mouth twisting in contempt. "Are you serious? First you keep me waiting, then you ask me to choose as if I have all day. What kind of training do you get here? Or maybe you skipped that memo while you were too busy polishing your nails." As laughter murmured from nearby tables, Aaliyah felt a hot surge behind her eyes. Her vision blurred at the edges. She could taste blood at the back of her throat, her grandmother's voice echoing. "You're a queen, Aaliyah. Never let them see you quiver." She pressed her fingers into her palms, grounding herself, remembering the firmness of her resolve. Clearing her throat, she bent slightly forward, keeping her voice low but unmistakable. "Sir, I'm here to serve you. Please let me show you the difference." Romano laughed, a hollow mocking bark that bounced off the glittering chandeliers. He leaned forward so that his cufflinks scraped her notebook. "Oh, do show me, sweetheart. Enlighten me." Her heart pounded against her sternum like a fist. Heat pooled under her collar. She felt every eye in the room shift to the center where they stood. In the half-light of the chandelier, Romano's assistant tensed, ready to spring. The woman at his table braced herself against the edge of the tablecloth. Even the pianist's fingers hung above the keys, reluctant to play on. Aaliyah took one slow breath, and in that pause, she crafted a reply in her mind, each word exact, deliberate, powerful. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried to the back of the room. "Sir, I recommend the blackened sea bass. It's fresh, perfectly seasoned, and I guarantee it will restore your faith in good service." Romano's laugh faltered. His jaw clenched. He leaned so close that she could catch the faintest whiff of expensive cologne masking impatience. "Blackened sea bass, really fitting." He sneered, but Aaliyah didn't flinch. She placed the notebook back into her apron hands, folded neatly before her. Her voice held a steady calm as she said, "You must be exhausted carrying that much hate into every room." Silence hit like a drumbeat. Romano's features froze mid-sneer, his mouth half open. The host of nearby guests went still, forks suspended in mid-air, murmurs cut off a glass teetering on the edge of a table. In the hushed aftermath, the only sound was Aaliyah's measured breathing. Romano blinked once, twice, as though he were waking from a dream. His assistant cleared his throat. A guest from table 14 shifted forward, their eyes wide. The woman in the sapphire gown stared as if transfixed. Then Romano's date, apparently his business partner, whispered, "Michelle, maybe we should." He snapped at her without looking up, "I am not done." Aaliyah's spine was straight, her chin high. She felt the blood pounding in her temples, heard it like thunder in her ears. Heat flared beneath her uniform, yet her face remained composed as though carved from marble. Romano leaned back and spat. "You think that was clever? Do you know who you're talking to? I can humiliate you anytime I want, and nobody will stop me." The manager, Carlos, finally stepped forward, sliding between them as though his presence alone could diffuse the storm. His voice was calm but firm. "Is there a problem here, sir?" Romano waved a dismissive hand toward Aaliyah. "I've been insulted in my own hotel." Carlos kept his gaze on Romano. "From where I'm standing, sir, all I see is a young woman doing her job, and a man abusing his power." A murmur of agreement rippled through the guests. "The woman at table 9." Romano's date nodded in Aaliyah's favor. Aaliyah's chest tightened as relief mingled with adrenaline. Romano slammed his napkin down and stood abruptly, chair clattering. "You people and your moral grandstanding," he spat. "Fine. Clap for the waitress. Pat yourselves on the back." And for a heartbeat, someone did. The man at table 14 raised his glass in silent salute. Then others followed, soft applause building to a crescendo. Romano's face turned ashen. He snatched his coat and stalked toward the exit, shoulders hunched. In the sudden stillness, Aaliyah closed her eyes, exhaled so quietly it was almost a whisper. She felt the release of tension as the room resumed its rhythm around her. Servers slipped forward to resume service. The pianist's fingers found the keys once more. Carlos placed a hand on her shoulder. Through her vision, she saw guests leaning in to leave generous tips. "Dignity," one woman murmured, folding a bill under her plate. "Grace," another whispered. Aaliyah straightened her uniform, smoothing the lapel of her vest, and turned away. She'd weathered the storm, and in the process, shattered the illusion of power. This was her moment of victory, not with a shout, but with the stillness that spoke louder than any tirade. In the hush that followed Michelle Romano's storming exit, Aaliyah felt the air around her shift like the moment just before a dam breaks. Her pulse had slowed to a steady drum, but beneath it raged a fierce determination. This wasn't over. The glittering banquet hall might have tried to reclaim its decorum, yet Aaliyah knew the real battle lay ahead. She had to seize control of the narrative to turn what felt like a personal assault into a powerful lesson on respect. She slipped behind a towering pillar, fingertips brushing its cool marble as she drew in a long breath. The blood still throbbed at her temples, her dark skin carrying the faint flush of adrenaline. Every nerve in her body pulsed with the memory of his words. "You people," the contempt dripping from each syllable. She tasted bitterness on her tongue. She could feel the eyes of dozens of guests lingering on her retreating figure, some in admiration, some in pity. Neither would do. A whisper of movement caught her ear, her manager Carlos re-emerging from the crowd, concern etched into his lined face. His hand hovered uncertain at her arm. She shook her head, a small, resolute motion. "Not yet," she mouthed. She needed space to gather her thoughts before the next stage of this confrontation. She retraced her steps to the service corridor, its walls lined with framed awards and stale echoes of clinking glasses, a stark contrast to the glitter just beyond. Here in the artificial light, Aaliyah let herself lean against the wall. She closed her eyes, head tilting back until her curls brushed the ceiling tiles. Thoughts tumbled through her mind, images of every late-night shift, every weighted glance, every time she felt too small to stand up, but also her grandmother's lullaby. "Your crown is in your heart, child. Never let them steal it." The old woman's voice was soft, but unyielding. In that moment, Aaliyah made a choice. She would not let Romano's arrogance define her. She would show him and everyone watching that her dignity was her weapons-grade armor. She pulled out her leather-bound notebook, the pages now smeared with nervous sweat. But she didn't need to jot anything. The plan was clear. She would confront him again, not with rage, but with unshakable calm. The second encounter would be our apex, the point where the world watching would witness the full extent of her resolve. She would refine the single line that had already given her power, sharpening it until it cut through his posturing like a blade. Her strategy formed in 3 steps. Re-establish control of the frame. Rather than cower when he reappeared, whether by design or happenstance, Aaliyah would return to table 9 on her own terms. She'd approach with measured steps, visible to every guest, reclaiming her space. In that approach, she'd demonstrate that she wasn't at Romano's mercy. He was at hers. 2. Expose the emptiness of his dominance. She would ask one more question, seemingly innocuous, but laced with the weight of truth. Not about his wine preference this time, but about the value of power itself. Something like, "Sir, when did you last earn respect?" instead of demanding it. The question would be soft-spoken, almost conversational, yet its implication would reverberate. Guests would lean in, aware they were witnessing more than service, they were witnessing a reckoning. 3. Deliver the final blow of dignity. Her closing sentence would encapsulate every slight, every echo of his arrogance. You built an empire, Michelle, but an empire without empathy is just an empty fortress. No raised voice, no theatrics, just the quiet force of undeniable truth. It would land after the question, giving listeners time to process, then punctuating the confrontation with clarity. As she finalized this mental blueprint, Aaliyah felt the familiar flutter of nerves transform into steely resolve. She closed the notebook, sliding it back into her vest pocket, and smoothed her uniform. Her dark skin gleamed under the fluorescent strip light, a reminder that she stood here not as a subordinate, but as her own person. Carlos stepped forward again, voice gentle. "Ready?" Aaliyah nodded, forcing a small, confident smile. She adjusted the hem of her vest, lifted her chin, and strode back into the ballroom. The crowd parted as she passed the soft click of her heels, marking each step like a drum roll. Romano had not yet returned to his table. In his absence, whispers spread across the room. Someone was expecting him. Someone was planning a second wave. Eyes darted to table 22 and table 19, and finally settled on the pathway leading to table 9. Aaliyah stopped a few feet away, pen-poised posture, unwavering. The moment stretched. Even the pianist's arpeggio slowed. Then, like the return of a returning king, Romano re-entered, coat slung over his arm face, composed but eyes wary. He met Aaliyah's gaze, uncertainty flickering for the first time. She smiled, not the timid upturn of lips, but a quiet, knowing curve that spoke volumes. And as she began with the question, she'd refined. Every guest leaned in, every camera phone raised, and the true reckoning began. Aaliyah rounded the polished oak floor toward table 9, each heel tap echoing in the hush that fell over the room. Romano lifted his brow as if surprised she was back. In her vest pocket, her slender notebook pressed against the fabric, her silent ally. She drew in a measured breath, feeling the cool weight of her pen against her palm, the thrum of dozens of eyes on her spine. "Sir," she began, her voice soft but carrying to the back of the hall, "when was the last time you earned respect instead of demanding it?" Romano's hand froze mid-reach for his glass. For a heartbeat, he didn't answer, his polished facade cracking. Guests leaned forward, forks halted in midair. The chandelier light refracted on crystal, scattering tiny stars across white tablecloths. Aaliyah's pulse steadied. She let him stew in the question's gravity. He cleared his throat. "I earn respect every day," he muttered, voice thin. Aaliyah allowed a slight nod, as if acknowledging a valid point, but then she pressed on. Perhaps she said, her tone unwavering, but a fortress built on fear and entitlement often crumbles from within. A murmur rippled through the tables. Romano's assistant slid a hand to his collar, uncomfortable. The woman in the sapphire gown shifted, her lips parting in surprise. Aaliyah's chest tightened with purpose. She would deliver the final sentence now, the one honed in her mind's furnace. Her words came calmly, each syllable deliberate. "You've spent decades building an empire. Michelle, but an empire without empathy is just an empty fortress easily toppled by a single stone of truth." Silence thundered in the grand ballroom. Romano's cheeks flushed, his jaw clenched. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Aaliyah watched as disbelief warred with indignation on his face. The pianist's final chord lingered, as if reality itself paused to listen. From table 14, a guest whispered, "Wow." Another guest's napkin unfurled in their trembling fingers. The assistant looked ready to flee. Across the room, servers straightened their posture, drawn into the spectacle of a powerless, powerful man finally exposed. Romano rose abruptly, chair scraping. Aaliyah's heart spiked, but she did not step back. She remained, rooted shoulders, square gaze locked on his stormy eyes. He looked around as though seeking allies, only to find sympathetic faces and nods of quiet approval. "Unbelievable," he growled, voice low. "You," Carlos emerged again, stepping between them with hands at his sides. "That's enough, sir," he said quietly. "This is our hotel. We uphold respect here." Romano's fingers curled into fists. He glared at Carlos, then down at Aaliyah. "You think you've won?" Aaliyah inhaled the taste of polished wood and rosewater on her tongue. She let a gentle smile curve her lips. "I haven't won, Michelle. I simply refuse to lose myself." That was the final blow. Romano's face went slack. He looked 15 years younger, his bravado evaporated. He turned away, snatched his coat from the chair back, and stalked toward the exit without a glance. The grand doors swung closed behind him, with a soft thud, a punctuation mark on his defeat. A ripple of applause began, first tentative, then mounting into genuine, heartfelt claps. Aaliyah's breath caught. Warmth spread in her chest, not from victory, but from knowing she'd stood tall without sacrificing her dignity. Guests rose to their feet in respect rather than fear. Tips were quietly left generous and unprompted. Carlos approached, voice thick with pride. "You were incredible." Aaliyah shook her head, smoothing the front of her vest. "I just spoke the truth." As order resumed, servers gliding, the pianist resuming a gentle prelude, Aaliyah returned to her station. Her notebook lay undisturbed in her pocket, its pages unwritten now, for her story had been told in living color. The hall's glittering grandeur felt softer, warmed by the humanity she had restored. In that charged, silent after the storm moment, Aaliyah understood the power of stillness. She had transformed humiliation into triumph, contempt into contemplation. And as the final guest departed, offering nods of gratitude and whispered condolences, she knew this single act of courage would resonate far beyond the walls of the sovereign grande, proof that even the grandest empire can be humbled by one voice of unwavering truth. The room remained hushed for a heartbeat after those final words, as if the chandeliers themselves paused to catch their breath. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a ripple of applause began at the back of the hall. It spread like wildfire, soft, hesitant claps blossoming into a standing ovation that echoed off the marble walls. Guests rose to their feet, faces bright with admiration, many wiping away tears or smiling in awe. No one dared resume conversation. Even the pianist let his hands linger on the keys, savoring the moment. Aaliyah stood perfectly still, her dark skin glowing under the crystal-light chest, rising and falling with calm resolve. She allowed herself a single slow nod, acknowledging the room's collective respect. Then she turned and glided back to her station heels, clicking purposefully, her notebook still tucked safely in her pocket. Colleagues met her eyes, their own expressions a mixture of pride and disbelief. Carlos emerged from the crowd, voice catching, as he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You just rewrote the rulebook." Across the room, the table that had held Romano's private audience now bore only an abandoned napkin and 2 half-full glasses. His departure left a vacancy that wasn't just physical, it was moral. Guests leaned in to share whispered reflections. She didn't shout, one murmured. She didn't curse, commented another. She spoke the truth. The collective realization blossomed into a deeper respect, not just for Aaliyah's courage, but for the quiet power of dignity itself. Within minutes, several diners discreetly left extra cash beneath their plates, $50, $100, even $200 bills folded into notes that simply read, "Thank you for your strength." Servers paused to collect them, eyes shining, while Aaliyah quietly slipped each into her apron pocket, her fingers brushing against the smooth leather of her notebook as a reminder of how far she'd come. As the gala concluded and the musicians struck into a soft waltz, murmurs turned to conversation about Aaliyah's words, her composure, her unspoken victory. Phones emerged to capture the empty table, the grand ballroom, the way the candlelight danced on her vest as she refocused on her duties. Guests uploaded photos and short clips with hurried captions, "Watch Aaliyah Brooks shut down a billionaire." Quiet, dignity, wealth. Within an hour, the hashtag #StandWithAliyah had taken flight across social media platforms. Backstage, Aaliyah finally exhaled, leaning against the cool stone wall. Her pulse was steady now, but the adrenaline still hummed beneath her skin. Carlos handed her a bottle of water. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, pressing the cap closed. "More than okay," she replied softly. "I feel free." He smiled, pride shining in his eyes. By the time she reached home that night, her phone buzzed nonstop. Notifications stacked like building blocks of attention, text messages from friends praising her, employers from other luxury venues requesting interviews, local news outlets offering on-camera segments. None of it felt like shock, more like affirmation. She slipped out of her uniform and sank onto her couch, exhaustion mingling with exhilaration. She scrolled through the flood of comments. "You inspired me to speak up." That was legendary. "I'm sending you dinner money." Amid the praise, she found one message that made her heart swell: an email from a youth center in East Cleveland, inviting her to speak to a group of teenagers about confidence and respect. The next morning, the Sovereign Grande's phones rang off the hook. Corporate PR called with arranged coverage. The general manager insisted on a formal letter of commendation. Aaliyah arrived for her shift to find a bouquet on her station and a note from the hotel owner. "Your integrity shines brighter than any chandelier." She smiled carefully, placing the flowers in water. In the back pocket of her apron, she found the extra tips collected the night before, more money than she'd ever seen at once. She let the weight of it settle, tangible proof that respect can translate into real value. But deeper than any tip or headline was the knowledge that she had shifted something fundamental. In one evening, she'd reminded everyone present and the thousands watching online that power untempered by empathy is hollow, and that real authority belonged not to the one with the largest bank account, but to the person who wields their voice with unwavering dignity. As she straightened her apron and prepared for the next dinner service, Aaliyah Brooks carried that lesson with her. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned in every silent heartbeat and every word spoken with purpose. In every corner of that grand ballroom, the reverberations of Aaliyah's calm defiance lingered long after the applause died down. We witnessed more than a single confrontation. What unfolded was a masterclass in reclaiming power without raising a fist. When Michelle Romano hurled insults, he expected fierce submission, perhaps even tears. Instead, he met unwavering composure and words that cut deeper than any scream. Think about the physics of that moment. One voice, quiet as a whisper, sending a shockwave through an entire room. That's the alchemy of dignity, how stillness can become a weapon sharper than rage. Aaliyah's heartbeat never thundered. She harnessed her racing pulse and channeled it into steady resolve. In her silence between sentences, you could hear the pounding of entitlement cracking under the weight of truth. Psychologically, this speaks to our most primal need to be seen and to be respected. Romano's authority crumbled not because he was overpowered, but because his facade was exposed. The audience flipped from passive observers into active allies the moment Aaliyah invited them to confront their own complicity in silence. We all felt that subtle invitation: stand with me or stand aside. The lesson here is searingly simple. Real strength lies in the space between words. When you refuse to mirror hostility, you force your opponent to look at their own reflection, and that's the real reckoning. Empathy isn't weakness, it's the mortar that holds communities together. Demanding respect by shouting only amplifies noise. Earning it through clarity and conviction shatters assumptions. So the next time someone tries to diminish you, whether by wealth status or sheer volume, remember Aaliyah Brooks. Remember how she transformed humiliation into her moment of triumph, not by fighting fire with fire, but by standing so immovable that the fire died out on its own. True authority doesn't need an audience's fear, it thrives on their genuine admiration. And that is a power no billionaire can buy. Remember, it's not the loudest voice that leaves the deepest mark, it's the one that speaks with unshakable conviction. Aaliyah Brooks didn't raise her volume, she elevated her truth. Tonight she reminded us that every one of us can stand firm even when the odds are stacked against us. If you've ever been silenced by someone's power, share your story below. Your voice matters. Hit like if you believe in the strength of dignity and subscribe for more stories of ordinary people doing the extraordinary. And don't forget to tap the bell so you never miss a moment when truth triumphs. Because when respect is earned in silence, that silence becomes the loudest thunder the world has ever heard.